There we go. All right. And I never get to the introduction, so I'm making a conscious effort to get to the introduction. But I'm with a man that probably needs no introduction. No, actually, I'm with my number one frenemy, Paultalk. This has been a long time coming. It's been it's been many, well, almost like 4 years since we talked on Follow the Rules, but it's been quite interesting. And but I've been meaning to do this for a while. I think we have a lot of things to discuss, things that we might not get to in 2 hours or 3 hours. I mean, there's so many things there. But I guess as a general introduction, um, you've been quite a very interesting mercurial figure, and it's I was thinking about how to do this intro because to me I think it's easier in terms of like, okay, I'm an artist, but I'm also a poster. I'm doing, I'm a content aficionado, but you have a very, how should I say, purified vision of what you're doing. So I wanted to actually, before we get into like discussing your book and discussing your approach to painting, um, I wanted to do a little bit of introduction. So you've been around various scenes, uh, artistic movements for a long time. Not to like blow up your age too much, but you,
Well, it's
yeah,
becoming
yeah,
canonical.
yeah. And so you were around for the from I've followed you for a very long time, but you were around for the later half of the abstract expressionists in New York. Your mentor, Aaron Curzon, was huge, relatively unknown, but sort of like, your favorite band's favorite band type of deal. And you've done quite a bit of biographical work in him. And so maybe let's go from the beginning. Your father was also an artist, a painter. And so what inspired you to become an artist? And what was the time like in the 50s and 60s? Well, maybe not the 50s, but like certainly you were around the 60s and 70s. And how have you transformed your approach? Oh, we'll get to that later. That's a huge question. So your origin story, Paultalk. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm my father was a rebel. His
Mm,
father wanted him to be a doctor, and he became an artist, and it was always kind of a problem. Whereas I only ever wanted to be an artist. I just wanted to
mhm,
follow in my father's footsteps, and that's what I did. I watched my father, I imitated my father, I worked for years with my father when he was building his machines and so on.
mm.
And so I kind of inherited my artistic vocation.
Yeah, interesting. Did you ever meet any of the greats? Like, did you ever meet like de Kooning or uh? I know your father was sort of like involved in some of these circles,
Well,
but
I mean, I when I was a kid, at one point I was taken to a one of Warhol's happenings,
mm,
and I encountered some greats like Larry Rivers. You probably don't
mm,
know about Larry Rivers, um, but I knew a lot of artists who had been important in the 50s, in the early 60s in New York, because there really was a revolution that happened. And I mean, I knew that all my life, and recently it was confirmed for me because we were very close friends with the Duristas. Robert Durista was one of the painters who had importance in the late 50s and early 60s. And a couple of years ago, I had occasion to visit his widow, who's always been a great family friend. And we talked
mm,
about this, and she confirmed to me that it was quite intense what happened in the 60s when the abstract expressionists took over. And Aaron Curzon, he told me about how there was a there was a bar in the village somewhere where artists gathered, and he was present when they were plotting to do this. I mean, that's not the only reason it happened, but there really was a desire on the part of a certain group of abstract painters to impose abstract painting as the thing. And when I, by the time I was old enough to go to art school, which would have been 1974, it was very clear that representational painting was out.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've mentioned many times, you've heard me say it many times, in the 90s, that really, after the fall of communism, and with the advent of artistic postmodernism, not philosophical or postmodernism, but artistic postmodernism,
Mm-hmm.
the interdiction on representation, which had always been a very funny thing. Certain kinds of representation were allowed and others weren't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it really softened after that.
Yeah.
But by that time, I'd left New York.
Well, it's very funny because in some ways, the young British artists, a lot of them started to use representation, and then that naturally led to painters that became popular, like the early to mid 2000s, like Jenny Savile. But even in the 80s, you had a lot of the remnants of pop art that were still doing some stuff here and there.
Well, pop
Yeah.
art was representational from the beginning, but
Hmm. Hmm.
but it was a different thing. What it really wasn't representation that was out. It was the past.
Hmm.
And pop art, in my view, is really a different thing. It isn't art anymore. It's
Yeah, well, it's
it's
popular media in a lot of ways. Yeah.
well, it's popular media, but it's not art in the old sense.
Mm.
And to get to your initial question, I can tell you that I absorbed the old feeling,
Mm-hmm.
the pre-contemporary art feeling, which was really, really nice, because all the artists of all different types were on the same page. Everybody was an artist. Everybody was interested in everything. There was no rejection of the past. People were fascinated by the past and they used it. And people were all over the place. And there was a feeling of community. It was just, it was still the old sort of artistic bohemia feeling where there was,
Mm-hmm.
we're all in this together, and we're in this together because we all love art. And I've always been nostalgic for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I didn't live it as an adult. I just absorbed it as a kid.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, some people would criticize you as saying that perhaps you shy away from, association with other people, but you have a very cantankerous sort of disposition. But I wanted to ask you, I was preparing for a solo episode. I was with my girlfriend, and we
Mm-hmm.
were in this library, and I found this book on truly one of my inspirations, Gustave Courbet. And I didn't know this, but there was a huge exhibition of his work in New York around the 50s or 60s, maybe like the 40s to 50s, the late 40s, early 50s. And this writer was trying to trace this genealogy of work where Courbet was sort of neglected in Europe, and then he was suddenly rediscovered by people like Franz Klein and the other abstract expressionists. And I wonder if there was always people that tried to make this connection between pre-impressionism, impressionism, and what was going on in New York in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I wonder, like, do you see those parallels? Because it seems the European avant-garde, they forgot that history, and it was up to the Americans to like resurrect French painting in a weird way, although it came out quite differently. So what would you say, or you would think that's just like modern
Well,
analysis?
that sounds like a very dubious historical analysis to me. I
Mm,
think Courbet was always a hero of painting.
yeah.
What I would say though is that in Europe, abstract expressionism never took hold the way it did in New York.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it happened, but what did happen was that the French Academy, which was still the Academy, they banned drawing in the 60s or maybe the 70s. I'm not sure exactly when they did it, but they designated it bourgeois and they banned it.
Mm-hmm.
And it came back in the 90s, and there were debates on French radio, which I heard, about bringing it back. It was very contentious. But the drawing they brought back was, as far as I'm concerned, not drawing. It was something that they called drawing.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's been a real problem. But in France, there were tons of painters who were still under the influence of Cézanne, or they were under the influence of Cubism, and that was still going on very strongly all over France. And I met these guys, and in the 90s and the aughts, they were old and dying, and now they're all gone. I met a guy who'd been a Fauvist, and then had gotten into a sort of a cubistic style, and he had a career where he sold his paintings in Scandinavia. And I met people who had studied with Balthus in Rome, and they were doing paintings influenced by Balthus. And these things in France, they were still being shown and they were still selling. And it wasn't the contemporary market with the millions and billions, but it was a more regional, lower level market that kept going. And I myself was able to make a living as a painter in a small town in France.
Is that why you moved to France from New York?
Yeah, but I didn't think it would happen. I just, my parents, like all artists, everybody went to France. My father, before my parents met, my mother was a pianist. But before they met, right after the war, my father had the GI Bill, and he went to Paris and he studied at the Grande Chaumière. And my mother went to Paris and had a debut at the Salle Pleyel. And everybody, Herbie Katzman, who was an artist, a friend of my parents, who was a terrific influence on me. He'd studied with Kokoschka and Enzor, and everybody did that.
Kokoschka is one of the personal heroes of mine. I mean, even though politically he may be a libtard, but like in terms of his style, like it's the parallels are like
well, so he was, I think, he and Enzor became tremendous influences on Herbie. And
interesting.
Herbie was a great influence on me. So,
well, that's very interesting because I wanted to get more of your, you've criticized a lot of I think what has become the popular imagination of people that would bring depiction and painting and figuration back into the forefront, such as Balthus or Odd Nerdum, however you say it.
Balthus is a different deal than Odd Nerdum.
Yeah,
that's a very different thing.
I mean, some people have canceled him recently for
well, okay. I mean, the subject matter.
The subject matter is risque.
Risque. It's.
Would you say it's for YouTube language? Is it pornographic?
No, it's
porn.
It's. I would say that it's not risque because it's not. Risque is peekaboo kind of thing.
Right.
And pornography is frank, all out, genitalia thing. Whereas Balthus, it's a little bit Pediac,
It's a phoebophilia. Yeah. It's, I'll have to
so it's not 100%, but it's obviously because it's not. He's obviously so into the grand tradition, if you like.
Right.
That,
of course.
That kind of softens.
His skill is undeniable, and that's why it's hard to criticize him. Yeah.
Right, but then there are other paintings of Balthus where there's none of that.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not like he was obsessed. It's not. It's just a few paintings which have that sort of subject matter.
Right. And then there was also there were people that were, I guess, taking Impressionism in Europe, but still doing figures or landscape painting. Painters like George Rowlett and Anselm Kiefer and what was his name?
Kiefer is
Cossack. Yeah.
I don't know the first painter you mentioned, but Kiefer is basically an abstract expressionist who is bringing content into the work, and in order to bring the content in the work, he's bringing a minimum of representation so that it can be whatever it is.
Right, right. But like, for example, Cossack and Rowlett and other ones in France and the UK, like, they loved impasto. They would use Stoke paints, which unfortunately got bought out recently by a bigger corporation. And they would, they trowel on these huge piles of paint and they throw on the canvas and they use their fingers. And I quite loved that. I quite enjoyed it. And there's still like even people on YouTube like Turner Vincent that do it. They'll take like
Well,
large canvases of
I'm afraid I don't know these people you're talking about. So, I mean,
but
is it like Julian Schnabel
yeah,
gluing
exactly,
plates?
Julian
Doesn't
Schnabel. Yeah. Only
you
like
know?
huge amounts of paint. Like Kiefer would like put them outside and he'd whack them, and then he like put another oil layer on.
Yeah, well,
And
that's abstract expressionism transformed into contemporary art.
interesting. Yeah, yeah.
And
But
it's all about content. And the thing about painting is that anybody can throw paint on a canvas.
right.
And if you get a big canvas and you throw a lot of paint on it, and with big contrast and bright colors and something, then it becomes a thing. Whereas, okay, so it's impressive and you call it painting, but
No, but
I mean,
okay, I
like,
think yeah. Go ahead.
well, I mean, you know, I've always been interested in you, Gio, and we encountered each other prior to the break the rules thing.
Yeah.
And I was always interested in you because you have a real painter's instinct. And so you always end up doing something that makes the picture come alive in a certain way that those guys just
Oh
don't.
wow. Oh my god. I don't think I'm as good as Anselm Kiefer. I mean, that's
I know. To me, Kiefer isn't interesting at all. Whereas your painting is interesting and promising.
wow. Let me show you actually a recent because for YouTube, I've been trying to get more into the video aspect of the podcast. This is a plein air piece I did. I switched to oils just for plein air because I want to continue working in the winter. Unfortunately, with acrylics, you can't do that. But this is my church that I've grew up around my whole life. I live down the street of. I'm already pretty
Mm.
much dogs. So I did this just a small like mantelpiece. I don't know if you can see that.
Well, it's got what your painting always has. You know,
Hmm.
it's it's uh, it's always full of light and form, and
Yeah.
it has a natural kind of harmony which is right away appealing, and that comes from your sensibility. You've got a painter's
Mhm.
sensibility.
Oh, thank you. That took about an hour or so. It was like I had to
Well,
fight the light was changing.
well,
Yeah.
because you're making a lot of sensible choices as you
Mm.
work, and
But
I mean, you've got a special feeling about light
yeah.
in your work.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm.
But I think we're getting. I want to talk about your work as well but I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning when you were starting your art education, and it comes out in your book, Art in the Age of Anxiety, where you talk about a tradition that is see this I thought this was going to be way more controversial and confrontational, but we'll get to that. We're going to talk about my friend Fan a little bit. Um but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Back in the turn of the century or before the turn into the 21st century, the mid 20th century to the late 20th century, you talk about this tradition that was lost in the sort of awareness of art, especially in the North American market with abstract expressionism. But you talk about this older tradition of true painting and the foundation of it being in drawing. So, for those who aren't aware of your work, give us a sort of rundown. I want to get to your definition of true painting. Before that, what is the tradition of painting that was lost? Why was it lost? This came up recently in your debate with Damien Chavez. What do you think was the turning point in that era in the post-war period? What was this tradition that you want to tap back into and why was it lost? Why was it so heavily derided? And why did art switch to this contemporary moment that you feel is we've sort of lost that ability to do great things in the work of art? So I know that's a mouthful, but go ahead. I mean, if you want to rant for a little bit,
All right.
for it. Yeah.
That's a very big question, and it didn't happen suddenly. It happened very progressively. And to answer it from a high level point of view, this is something that happened in waves, and it was a struggle. It's something that went back and forth. But it really started with the French Revolution and the incursion of ideology into normal life. And ideology, I define ideology as a way of thinking that is it's technology. It's a sort of thought technology.
Social technology is neo-reaction.
Or well,
Yeah.
but above all, thinking technology.
Right.
So, which the goal of which indeed is sociological or whatever. And so the purest example is Marxism.
Right.
So Marx looks at society and says, well, what's really going on is economic things and domination and class struggle. And it's not like those things aren't true, but there are other things going on. You know, people have religious ideas, they're sentimental, they're getting married, they have parents, they admire, some other country or some crazy thing. You know, there's lots of things going on. So ideology narrows it down. It's like a machine. So, okay, everything is this, and that explains everything. And here we go. We're all set. We can think like this. So the incursion, and it's related, in my view, it's related to the rise of science and industry, which was such a powerful thing that changed the world and created all this prosperity. It did all this good stuff. And people were so impressed. So there's this thinking that goes along with it. And eventually you get ideas like, well, communism is going to generate socialist man.
Right.
So ideology comes in, and that affects everything, including painting. And then, so all this painting starts happening that is influenced by ideology. But because painting has nothing to do with ideology, the influence of ideology isn't sort of one-to-one thing. The influence, what happens with painting is that ideology wants to accomplish something.
Right.
So then painting, when the painters get into this thing, okay, we got to accomplish this thing. We have to use painting to accomplish this thing. And what that does to painting is very simple. It turns it into illustration. And then the perfection of illustration is illusion.
Right.
So you end up with all this incredible illusion. You know, that's an aspect of painting. So it's not like exactly like the end of the world, but they get so into this illusion thing that they forget other aspects. So right away, when that happened at the beginning of the 19th century, after the French Revolution, there were other painters who didn't go along with that. And they in fact were holdovers, if you like, people like Daumier and Géricault, Delacroix, and there's a whole bunch of them, and they were holdovers. And then another generation came along who actually rebelled against this. And the two most emblematic, there's others, but the most emblematic characters are, first of all, Manet, who very deliberately and openly and obviously went back to Velázquez.
Yeah.
He didn't want these neo-Davidian thing. He didn't want neoclassicism. He wanted Velázquez. And then there was Puvis de Chavannes, who's been forgotten, but who up into the 40s and 50s was considered one of the great artists. And I remember if you get old art books from the 30s and 40s, and there's a Raphael, and there's so on and so on, and there's a Puvis de Chavannes in there, and Puvis went back very obviously and deliberately to Poussin, another 17th century painter.
Yes,
and
exactly.
and so there was a group of painters who were rebelling against neoclassicism, which had become very optical, very much about illusion.
Yeah.
And that became called modernism. But in fact, it was a what's the word I'm looking for? They were reactionaries. I mean,
yes.
I mean, they wouldn't think of themselves as reactionaries. They just wanted to be like the old masters.
Right.
And then, so there was the French Revolution, and then things calmed down. There was the Restoration. There was kings and Napoleon again, and so on. But then Marxism came along, and it wasn't just Marx, but it was the whole historical thing and so on. And this got mixed up with true painting, and the true painting idea. And I don't know this for a fact. I learned about true painting from the writings of Arthur Dow, who's an American who studied in Paris in the 1880s, and he discusses true painting and he explains what it is. And what it is I call it the modernist, the early modernist analysis, and I think it comes out of the circle of Puvis. I don't know that, but I think if historians look into it, I think that's what they'll discover. In any case, it comes out of these circles that eventually Dow encountered in Paris. And so they were trying to figure out, they were trying to get back to the old masters, and they were looking at this neoclassicism, which dominated. If you go to France and you go around Paris and go into churches, for instance, if you go into Saint-Sulpice in Paris, where there's the famous Delacroix, Jacob fighting the angel, well, there's about 50 or 60 other huge paintings in there. I mean, Delacroix is in the first chapel on the right, but there's a ton of little chapels, and they're all full of these great big paintings. And you've never heard of any of these people. So you've got to realize that when Delacroix, whenever it was in the 1840s or 50s, when he was doing this stuff, there were these tons of painters doing all this painting. And it was all different flavors of neoclassicism, because it wasn't like there was a neoclassical school and then there were these rebels. It wasn't like that. It was on a scale. It was on a scale. So it was very, very mixed bag.
Well,
and,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So to try to get out of this thing, they were confronted with this neoclassicism, which was so illustrational, so much about illusion. And they said, well, look, there's also, you look at the old masters and the colors are so beautiful and the forms are graceful on their own. And the surface is beautiful. If you look at a Bouguereau, I mean, the first Bouguereau I ever saw was that in Williamstown in Massachusetts, the nymphs pulling it's an amazing thing, but the surface is like glass.
Yeah. It's very smooth.
Whereas if you look at a Fragonard, there's a wonderful Fragonard in that museum too. I mean, it's just the paint is piled on and thrown around, and it's the paint, it becomes an event, whereas the paint isn't even there in the Bouguereau. So they said, well, there's the illustrative aspect of painting, but there's also the decorative aspect of painting, which is the material on the surface, the forms in and of themselves, all these things. So this is an analysis which is correct, and it's an abstract, a theoretical understanding of painting, which was important at that time. But then when this idea of history and the progress of history came along, eventually painters started saying, well, look, painting has got to be like history. It's got to progress. And so, their idea was, well, the old painting was very illustrative, but now we understand that there's the decorative aspect. So they started getting into the decorative aspect more and more. And the decorative aspect, when you take away the illustrative aspect, becomes abstract painting.
Yeah.
And so that's basically what happened. And as Marxism took hold more and more, painting got more and more artists, not everybody, not all of them. It's a mixed bag, and there was a spectrum. but there was more and more interest in that. And then there was a parenthesis in the 30s with social realism all over the world, where again the governments were demanding the artists to illustrate this stuff. So the artists, with the tools that they had, which were kind of modernist, the social real some social realism is more classical, some is more modernist, and so on.
So like the American regionalists, like Grant Wood, for example,
right.
They were commissioned by FDR to do these murals in public buildings.
That's right. It was just like in Germany and Italy and Russia and all over the place. The whole world was doing it, and it was all the same. The basic idea was to celebrate the society and the regime and so on.
Right.
Celebrate their.
And you think that that's a sort of aberration rather than, I mean, a criticism that you've gotten a lot is that art, not like, like I guess the woke more correct, like art is always inherently political, even in the ancient regimes. Artists were in the patronage of the church and so on and so forth. But you're saying that there is this much older tradition of true painting that does not belie a certain ideological fixation on a current moment, that there was always painting. And
well, the thing is that painting can illustrate anything,
right?
But when this thing happens where ideology takes over, and because of circumstances, what happened was there's this total dominance of the decorative aspect, which is really basically what it is an ideological takeover of painting, in the same way that the super illustrative thing of neoclassicism or classical realism in the late 20th century is also an ideological takeover. Now, the classical realists think that they're getting back to tradition, but they're, they have an ideological perspective on it. They're not looking at painting itself. And so it comes out the way it comes out. And so you get this really truncated view of painting where, it's not, you see a guy like you have the soul of a painter. So you're into all these ideas and, Heidegger and the whole thing. But when you get the paintbrush in your hand and you're in front of your painting,
I'm not really thinking about that. Yeah.
Even if you are thinking about that, you also have the soul of a painter. So you're painting. And I'm not. I don't think that I'm not quite like you or certain other guys. I don't quite have that natural thing. I mean, I have certain talents, certain natural talents.
Yeah, of course.
But it was very hard for me to get into it. It was really hard for me to get into it, and I had to do a lot of it through my thinking. And there's other people like me who, and we all are that way to one degree or another. We need help in different areas. People have different kinds of talent. So I really tortured myself for decades trying to figure this thing out. And eventually, first of all, to help myself be able to paint better paintings.
Yeah, of course. But so I think the way that you've laid it out, because your presentation is very confrontational and it can be off-putting, but the way you're laying it out is that I think what you mean is that a sort of extreme logical conclusion reification of, say, the illustrative element would be like photorealism. An extreme logical conclusion to the decorative aspect would be precisely like Anselm Kiefer or Rothko or Jackson Pollock, like throwing paint on the canvas. And now the paint itself becomes the visual spectacle. And
Kiefer would be a little bit mixed because he's bringing a little bit of illustration, but just because, you see, the thing is, just because you're aware of the decorative aspect and you're aware
Right.
of the illustrative aspect and you're bringing that doesn't mean that the painting is good. That's good. That's a good place to be, but that's
Mhm.
not going to, in and of itself, that's not going to make good painting.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and by the same token, you can look at pure abstract painting, and it can be more or less interesting because you. But
Oh yeah.
I want to. I didn't. What I wanted. I didn't end up making my point. I got sidetracked before
Oh
your
yeah. Go
previous
ahead. Go ahead.
question.
Yes.
I
Sorry.
just want to get back to that. No, it's my fault because I left it out. But the, so if you're painting, you can you can make a painting of an apple, or you can make a painting of a king, or you can make a painting of a king triumphing over another king, or you can make a painting of the communists triumphing over the bourgeois.
Yeah.
But
It's
in other words,
socialist
it's
realism.
not because you're making that painting that you stop being a painter. So the having political content is not the problem, but it's
Right.
also not the solution. It's just
Interesting.
it's a secondary question when it comes to painting.
I see. And so when you encounter art movements on the right and the left that say that the work of art is something that can deliver us a certain political outcome in the minds and hearts of people, you're saying that that is sort of an abuse of what painting actually is. In other
Yeah,
words.
what I would say, I mean, I can imagine a great painter who has political convictions
Right.
and that uses his painting to further those. I can imagine that. That's not something that's impossible. But what's going on in general, because we're so away from any kind of proper painting consciousness, is that the work of a painter, what painters can do is make beautiful paintings. That's how
Right.
they can help the situation.
Right.
So there's all this crap and all this dumb stuff, and then if there were some really beautiful paintings, some really exciting paintings, maybe eventually, if someone were interested, then there they'd be. It's a whole different thing than Fenn. And the thing is that the idea of resurrecting masculinity and vitality. Well, okay, but look at tackle. So are you resurrecting force and masculinity, or defeat and wimpness because you get tackled?
Well, with victory comes defeat. One has to lose.
Well,
Like this
but
is
you see,
one has to go over. One has to do the job. Like it's pro wrestling.
well, I
Like
mean,
yeah,
but that's the thing. So by illustrating that, in
right,
spite of himself, he's also illustrating defeat. I mean, is it really a picture of the defeat of masculinity? I mean, is this tackler really, sort of some kind of trance man who's destroying masculinity? I mean, it's just,
well, okay,
you can interpret it, because the thing is, so okay, you're showing somebody tackling somebody else. So
right,
that event, I mean, it's everything that's there. It's not just the force of this tackler. It's also the defeat of the other guy. So
right,
then
right,
he has another one where it's called force. So he's this guy pushing into this force, and you see these lines of force coming out, and it's also but at the same time, you could say, well, you know, you're seeing this great effort being made. It's a big masculine effort. But
right.
what's the end of this effort? Is he going to be defeated? Is finally all his effort and all his masculinity? Is it going to be, is he going to have all his testosterone drained out by this effort? So,
Right.
so when we illustrate things, we're going to make a painting and we're confronted with the world, and the world comes across.
Right.
So the idea, you can't really, it's representing vitality. It's ideology. You could, as you represent ideology, you represent something else. So that Sam Wilde, he does the Prometheus thing. Let me say that I helped him with that painting. He's got me banned on Twitter, but I helped him with that painting.
What would happen with that? Is it?
Well, he was
you
doing
gave him a
different things.
Paultalk down too. Is that what happened?
No, it was in private. I pointed out to him that certain of the proportions were wrong, and he corrected them and made it better and good. And
Right.
and that also, it has nothing to do with cubism. But okay, Prometheus. So he's showing this triumphant thing of Prometheus, but we all know what happened to Prometheus.
Yeah.
So what's he showing? So it's the idea that it's masculine force, but if you know anything about anything, you know what happened to Prometheus. And you know also what men did with fire. So it made them powerful, but then they used it for evil and blah, 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 blah in life.
You're doing immediate literacy right now. You're doing immediate literacy. Yeah. You're pissing me off because I could I don't know what to say here. I'm worried I'm gonna get some heat for this, but I can kind of see a little bit of what you're saying, I think.
You don't want to agree with me, Gio.
No, you're making me angry because I'm kind of like, I think to play devil's advocate though, I mean, ultimately any expression of force and violence will naturally entail defeat as well. And I think that would be the panacea of human emotion. But what you're saying is that the problem with Fenn is that he's only sort of wanting you to focus on the masculine act of victory as opposed to the tragedy of defeat. But I would argue that his work has both, though, and I think that's
it does. But
good.
Because he's not.
But he's selling it in a certain way, and that's the problem.
Well, even that isn't the problem. The real problem has to do with his own awareness of what he's doing. He's not aware enough of what he's doing. So in other words, he does these things, and in a certain way he succeeds, but in another way, when I look at it, it has this ridiculous side because he's doing this stylistic thing that he doesn't understand. He's just copying it superficially. So that has these problems that brings in. And then he's not looking at he's so obsessed with getting this masculine thing that he's missing that it looks like an erotic act that he's depicting, and he's missing that he's got this defeat going on. So if you wanted, it's fine to do a tackle. It's like George Bellows with his thing. So you've got the guy who's defeated, you got the guy who punched him, you got the audience, you got the whole thing. Yeah. It's a world. It's the world. It's the world.
Right.
Right. And so the idea of showing masculinity, or they do that like with classical realism. There's a lot of classical realist painters that paint male nudes because there's this market for male nudes, and so they make those paintings and they sell them. And I don't know how artistically interesting or not they are, but what I've seen, it's not very artistically interesting. It's because ideologically,
my talked about this as well. Yes, there's a lot of classical realists that do this. Yes.
Yeah.
But it comes from, I think, the Scandinavian tradition. Like there was like a lot of full frontal male nudity, and it was done in a very realistic style. And there was obviously like a sensibility there. But like from what I've seen from a lot of them come from the Odd Nerdum school. A lot of them are great painters. Certainly, they have more talent than I do. In terms of their ability.
Gio, I wouldn't say that. What they have is they've developed a narrow skill.
Yes.
Which thank God you haven't developed, because it deforms you. The classical realism is a bad thing because they spend so much time learning to make these incredible illusions, which when you get to know how to paint, in a few years, you'll be able to do that standing on your head because it's easy. It's not real easy if you don't know how to do it. Or, you can learn that in 3 years. Anybody can learn to do that in 3 years. But they used to say that it takes 10 years to make a painter.
Yes.
And it does. So, and they didn't start out, they didn't start out with the illusion. The illusion came at the end because they didn't even have to bother about that because it was so easy.
I remember there was this one video where one of them, who was a great luminary, a more contemporary, I think he's a little bit younger than I am. He was in the Odd Nerdum school, and I forget his name, but he was doing, he's like, this is Rembrandt's secret medium where you mix the egg. And then someone in the comments said, Rembrandt pretty much just used like silica and linseed oil. Like, it's like there's always like some super special secret thing that must be how you can paint like Rembrandt, and it's like, no, like Rembrandt had a godly talent that was beyond this world, in my opinion. But I think that his tools were very like was very rough and coarse, and he would like mix dirt and silica, and he had like very impasto impressionistic paintings. But when you look at them up close, but then the problem is when it becomes sort of like a cottage industry where these ateliers are selling you like, how do you paint like this master? To me, I 100% agree with you. Like that's like, it's like, I mean, obviously, like when you look at their illusionistic skill and their ability to paint portraits and realism, I'm like, oh man, I could never do that. But then you look at him like, but then every painting has this quality where you're just painting. I know we're picking on him, but like you're just painting like Odd Nerdum. And it's like, like that was one thing I think even my friend Matthew, I know you have your disagreements with Matthew stuff, but like he said, like, when Titian had students, he would often encourage them to do their own thing because the good mark of a painter, of a teacher, is to give you tools that you can then bring forth into making something else. But when you're a teacher and you're operating an atelier and this classical realism obsession that a lot of trads have, it's like you're just trying to create like human photocopiers of what you are. And I think that is a huge problem with those systems.
Yeah.
And not that I would ever criticize their skill or their ability, but like there is something there that you've accurately criticized. And but I mean, okay, but when it comes to like I don't know where to go with this because I'm kind of like I'm kind of trepidatious, but I see what you're saying though, but at the same time, it is encouraging to see people like Fenn that are willing to take on these huge feats of these artistic endeavors. Sculpting is an incredibly hard medium to perfect and to get right. And but at the same time, like I do understand your point about wanting to force an ideological picture as a form of compensation towards the world around you. Then that becomes like, I'll give you a good example. I'm not going to name his name because honestly, I don't want any heat. But like, there's this guy that was like a painter that was doing a lot of like Ernst Fuchs type of stuff, like fantastical realism, and he then did the whole like, the woke canceled me from art school sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's no longer a painter; he's like a Groiper streamer. And it's like, you sacrificed artwork to become a streamer. It's like, I mean, I guess like if painting becomes ideology, what you're saying as an example of this, Groiper general, it's like might as well just be a streamer, might as well just be a commentator,
That's
and
right.
just
It's
get rid of
something
like,
else.
yeah, and so I think your point is that if you're going to do the work of art in a serious manner, you may have ideological convictions, but it's like, okay, but then might as well just be a commentator, might as well just be go on Rumble and say expletives and it's like, but I don't think, but to be fair though, I don't think Adams and Fenn are doing that, but
But
you're
they
saying like
are. They are.
well,
They are.
we
They
could
are. They're
disagree.
they're vitiating. They're vitiating their art thing because they're not. I'm not impugning their talent or even their artwork. I mean, most of what Adams does, I don't find very interesting, and I like some of Fenn's work, but they're hamstringing themselves because they're not paying attention to what they're doing. But I want to say,
I'll give you an example. There's this one work by Adams. It was the print that he did. The girl like looking with this like quiet desperation, and it was very meaningful, but it was very different from a lot of his other work. Like a lot of the erotic paintings and a lot of the more like masculine stuff he's doing. And I think like what made it great was that he took his style, his ability, his monochrome style, and he had such a feeling and a sensitivity and a sentiment. This like little girl who you could tell like she's from like an upper class British background, but there's obviously like some brooding uncertainty and desperation there. And like to me, I was like blown away. But like what you're saying, like when then, but then like there's other works where it's like, I mean, he's yeah, like
All right, all right.
I
But
kind of
look,
see where you're saying.
I don't know that piece. But look at your reaction. It's something. It has something to do with class and brooding and blah. All these things you're talking about. What does that have to do with masculinity? What does that have to do with kickstarting the zeitgeist? Nothing. It's just something
Right.
that interests you.
True.
And so if he was doing wonderful work like that, great. And if people get interested in art again, if we get out of this crazy thing, then great. He'd be doing this wonderful artwork. But
Well, I mean, yeah. I'm gonna have to pay
but
all this. No, but full disclosure, I'm probably going to interview Alexander Adams again. But I just wanted your perspective on it because, again, I am a neutral observer, and I am friends with everybody involved, including you. And I think like
yeah,
to me,
I'm not the enemy. They don't like me, but I'm not their enemy. I'm trying to help them.
right, and but what to this is so. Oh my god, this is more difficult than I anticipated. Because I want to hurt. Like they're like I love their work, and all of them are friends of mine, and I consider you a friend as well. But one thing I will say though, to your point, okay, and I hope they're big enough people they could take it, right? And I'll probably be in the next show, but I was going through a lot personally with my mother recently, and you know so I didn't have the time to ship my work, and so but what I would say is that I do notice this tendency that I've been talking about for a while now, which is that despite what people may say about me, I don't think this way. That because a lot of it comes from like being besieged by contemporary mainstream society being overtly left wing and being denied institutional legitimacy. A lot of that is a valid criticism, but what I notice is that there is a sense in which people, especially online in the online right wing, there's a sense that the work of art has to serve, like you were saying, this greater ideological purpose, and that you can reverse engineer the social conditioning if we have like this whole discussion over right wing art. Like I don't know if you saw the Lomez interview with Ross Douthat. Like a lot of people talk about like what is this thing called right wing art, and to me, I know I've been slotted in this camp because of writings I did years ago. I would say like I actually recorded a response to you while I was driving. And to what I said in it. Now that you're here with me, I didn't think about this, but that I would interview you and I would talk to you directly. To me, like it's like a metaphor in Buddhism of the raft and the shore, where like in Mahayana Buddhism, like the lesser vehicle is your dharma, and once you go across the shore, you kind of don't need the raft anymore. You don't carry the dharma with you into enlightenment, into nirvana. But it's not into because it's realization. So it's kind of complicated Buddhism. But like let's say a vulgar metaphor for that, right? So to me, like this whole thing about right wing art is like it's not going to exist in the future if like quote unquote based world is achieved because you're sort of like carrying something forward that by definition, because this is the thing with quote unquote right wing art, by definition, it should not exist in the future because you're trying to imagine a world that is fundamentally different than the current contemporary society, society, whatever you want to call it. So I think like the obsession over art being quote unquote right wing is a misplaced metaphor because you're talking about something that by definition should not exist in the future because then it would just be the work of art. You would be allowed to have institutional legitimacy as a person of the right. So to me, like when people talk about like we need more works of art, to me it's like almost like you're talking about the work. I mean, the work of art is kind of a commodity, let's be real, right? But like there is a capitalist realism reality, right? But you're talking about it as if it's like we need more streamers, we need more politicians, we need more this, we need more that. and to say like we need more right wing art is sort of to me like beyond the point. In a weird, if I'm trying to make sense here, like what do you think about this debate about like right wing art? Because to me, it's like the raft and not the shore. As soon as you cross the shore, you don't need the raft anymore. You don't need this thing called right wing art because then you would just live in a society that is right wing, and this it becomes irrelevant. And so to me, like when people ask me a lot, they're like, "Gio, what do you think of this thing called right wing art?" I think, well, it's kind of like as an artist myself, even though I am ideological in a sense, I don't really think that when I do a painting, to me, it's more just venerating the traditions from which I come from, which is in Canada, the Group of Seven and others. And to me, like doing that, I mean, yes, I'm doing the Zarathustra series. That's a bit different. It's more illustrative and so on and so forth. But I'm not thinking like when I paint Zarathustra, I made this conscious decision. I don't want to paint like Zarathustra's a Giga Chad and like he's fucking no, because there's a lot of very quiet aesthetic moments in the book Zarathustra. For example, the three desert women, like that doesn't constitute depicting Zarathustra as a Giga Chad that's coming down from the mountain. He's wrestling a bear, and it's like a Frazetta. I mean, I love Frazetta, but like it's not like a Frazetta painting, right? Conan the Barbarian. But so what do you think of this thing about like right wing art? Then we'll get back to the history of true painting. But this debate over right wing art, like you've talked about this, but what do you think about when people online, the frogs, the online right, they're like, we need more right wing art, but what does that really mean? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that makes sense. It's like, let's have a big, powerful raft, and then we'll get there. But there's so much concentration on wanting to have the institutional legitimacy, wanting the institutions to change, and I can understand that because there's more money around art now than probably has ever gone into art in the whole history of humanity.
Including when the Catholic Church funded it, even. Yeah.
Right. And there's more. I mean, what did Michelangelo make for the Sistine Chapel? It took him 12 years. I mean, we know the sum of money that he made. And there were more artists. There are more artists today than have ever existed in all of humanity.
Right.
And what I say is that this contemporary art world is not about art. The money that is supporting that and all the energy that's supporting that will never be for art because that's not what it's for. So there's not going to be a switch of the institutions.
Right.
This thing that's going on will either go on forever or it will die for some reason. I mean, maybe Trumpism will kill it. I don't know, because it's, why are people buying these things that, it doesn't take long to make a canvas and cover it with paint, and then suddenly you've got a tax shelter that involves hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. You've got a way to transfer money. So it's about other things. And I strongly suspect that what happened to me, I don't know if you followed what happened to me with Aaron's work and saving Aaron's work.
Yes, I've followed a little bit, but if you can go to talk.
Well, I mean, I don't have any proof or anything, but I was involved with billionaires who manage private fortunes in New York. This super hyper thing, and these people who run a private investment firm with 50 employees on Park Avenue, and so billions and billions and billions, and they were trying to get a hold of that artwork. I don't know why. I suspect it because it was an easy way of getting hold of something that they could easily legitimize and then use as tax shelters and so on. But I don't know. Why were these people manipulating me and terrorizing me to get a hold of this artwork that they thought they could get a hold of through me? So, it's just one more example. It's a personal example, but there's a million of examples of how this so-called art world is not about art.
Right.
So that I mean, we're in the world that we're in. I mean, politically, I'm where you are.
Right, right.
A right wing, whatever, and I've been there longer than any of you guys. You know,
Oh yeah, that's true.
I was horrified by contemporary art already in the 70s.
Mm. Well, some of
And
it's good. I quite like a lot of contemporary art, but it was
well,
yeah.
whatever. I mean, once again, it's a mixed bag. You know,
Yeah.
it's like the 19th century. It's a mixed bag. There's things that are more or less artistic. You can't, it's not just a black and white thing. But in general, ever since you know, that gallery starts with a G, whatever it is.
Guggenheim,
No. The art dealer from the
Gagosian.
set. No. No, this is ridiculous. I blank out at the moment. The guy who, he became this huge art dealer, and it was right away millions and billions in New York. Anyway,
You're
Castelli.
Castelli, yeah, not Larry Gagosian. Castelli,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, that was, one of the real dumpster fires that got going. So with this whole completely fake thing. So we live in it. We don't live in the 18th century anymore. In the 18th century, there was like, you want to be an artist? Okay. You go to these different schools and teachers, and then maybe you win a prize of Rome or whatever. And there's different kinds of things. You can work as a decorator. You can do these different things. And there was a whole industry, and great talents like Watteau, who was just slaving away as a decorator. He was noticed by these great painters, and so that's how it worked. So the art world took care of itself, and there was this market, and there were also artists who didn't make it. They wanted to be painters, and they didn't make it, and so on. There's this, but now we're in this weird thing where there's this weird monster that's taken over. That's art. It's written on there, and it's really just a hippopotamus. So we live in this crazy world, but you can sell paintings. In London, they Sam Wilde sold his Prometheus painting. Alexander Adams sold some paintings, sold some of his drawings there, whatever. So I sold paintings to local people here in France. Nice still lives and landscapes and stuff. So there is still a, you can still, you can't get famous. You can't have a big career, but you can exist.
Yeah.
Right. You can exist as a serious artist if it's still possible because there's so much prosperity. I don't know what's going to happen. Is civilization going to fall apart? It might.
Maybe. Who knows? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So artists have to be concerned with art. I mean, but artists are human beings. You and I are human beings, and we have certain political feelings. And of course, there is a certain relation between politics and art in our minds.
Right.
But when it comes to politics, that's going to mean certain things. And when it comes to painting, it's something else. Just the same way when it comes to romance, that's another domain. They overlap. It's sort of a Venn diagram, but it's a different domain. And food, transportation. There's all these domains that, and painting is and art is its own thing.
Right, but I get the sense that even on the right, there is this like kitchification of the work of art, where it's like we want, like, I mean, the worst example to me is like, I guess, McNaughton and like the Trump in a MAGA hat and MLK in a MAGA hat, and it's like
I don't know those things, but I can imagine.
He's like the core painter of Trumpism, McNaughton. But no, but like there is a sense of like I want the work of art to reaffirm my values, but then it's like I said this on Digital Archipelago last night with Prude. It's like, yeah, but like, do you really want like right wing slop given to you? Like, do you want like I want my slop based? It's like 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 art should challenge you, and it's like I think
challenge you or to me, art is something that's lovable. Like your little church painting there doesn't challenge you. It's just lovable. it's lovable. It's nice. What? Yes. A church, the sky, the light, the form, the texture. It's lovable.
Yeah,
And
but I think like if art has an ideological component, it should be a more meaningful engagement with ideas that are almost mythological, like bordering on mythological, rather than like, you know, there's this one McNaughton painting. You should look it up. Trump crossing the Potomac, and it's like, like George Washington crossing the Potomac. It's called Trade the Swamp, and I'm like, oh my god, I know a guy who has a McNaughton. I know a guy actually who has a McNaughton. And I'm like, and he's trying to tell me.
I know who that guy is. He did that big paint. Yeah, I see who it is now.
Yeah. And it's like Trump crossed, like Washington crossed the Potomac. It's like, I shouldn't single him out. He's a great painter, but it's like, there is.
What do you mean? He's a terrible painter.
Well, okay. Oh, he's a terrible. Yeah, okay, but like the figures come out kind of glossy. There's this like woke tard woman who did a painting of who did the painting of George Washington crossing the Potomac?
Peel? No.
Oh, I forget, but like there was like a woke tard woman that like George Washington's like a black woman crossing the river. And it's like, okay, but then there's the right-wing version, which is Donald Trump's crossing the Potomac. I'm like, it's the same shit. It's the same. It's like, please, I'm gonna go and I have my plein air set up and I'm just gonna paint a landscape. I'm not gonna worry about this crap. It's like, it's just, but I get the sense that it's like, yeah, they want right-wing slop. And it's like, but it's still slop. And it's like, I know I get angry about this because I feel like I've personally been unduly pigeonholed as like one of these voices of like right-wing art, but it's like, I don't really like, I know like, for example, Zarathustra appeals to a lot of right-wingers, but to me, it's like beyond the point. I don't even agree with a lot of what Nietzsche was writing about, but it's, to me, I feel like it's a monumental work in the Western canon that deserves to happen.
Sure.
There's, sure. But I think like,
you're like Doré illustrating Dante.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, but to me, I think which I've sort of come around to your position a bit in that I still think that politics and ideology, they have at least some of a place within the work of art, but like when it becomes the thing, like my art is going to be a vehicle within the world. To me,
the thing is,
there's something there that just makes me
you can illustrate something,
right?
But that's a different issue from the art.
Yeah.
Because you could illustrate the opposite thing in the same way that the slop can illustrate one thing or the other. The good art can also illustrate one thing or another. But you made a point earlier about the art having some kind of deeper involvement and so on. Well, painting does certain things. Right. It's like take love.
Yes.
Or even sexuality.
Right.
Involves and the erotic. I mean, in real life with people, it involves certain things. And eventually, like if you have different political points of view, maybe somebody becomes unattractive because they have a different political point of view. But what does that have? It then impacts the erotic, so you lose attraction because. But
right.
The erotic itself is something else, like touching somebody. Or it's just a whole different domain, and painting is its own domain, which is all full of richness. You look at, I don't know, Tintoretto's Battle of Lepanto or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's like, what's going on? What's the message? There's so many messages, but it's all just a kind of a vibration around what's painted.
Thank you for listening to the Content Minded podcast. If you wish to support me and listen to every episode in full, then please go to patreon.com/giantartproductions and substack.com/Gio's Content Corner. There you will find the full archive of every Content Minded episode, as well as every Giant Art Review episode, and exclusive to all patrons, the weekly Cole Report, where I break down interesting stories and discourse from throughout the week. Subscribe today to keep the content renaissance alive.